Sure.
Hi, I'm Lowell Joseph Gallin, and I am here in the park in Abu Tor Givat Hanania, where I live. And this is my neighbor Joel Kramer. Hi, Joel.
Hi.
Thank you for being a guest on our show.
Sure, my pleasure.
And Joel is a photojournalist who is now studying archaeology at the Hebrew University. Thank you. This is Joel's book, Beyond Fear. A harrowing journey across New Guinea through rivers, swamps, jungle, and the most remote mountains in the world. Like Lewis and Clark going across America a little bit earlier, Joel and his friend Aaron took a 102-day trek across New Guinea 20 years ago this last month in March. They had the 20th anniversary. And Joel is going to tell us a little bit about going across New Guinea, which took a lot longer than he thought, and his amazing encounters there, including man-eating crocodiles. He's going to tell us about that too. Where do you want to start? With the crocodiles, the big snakes, the people you met in the mountains who pulled the bows on you, when your canoe turned over in the river and you lost all your supplies and got stranded in the middle of nowhere? This is really in the middle of nowhere, by our standards. Where do we start in New Guinea?
Well, I mean, just in general, the trip was, the island of New Guinea, by the way, is the second largest island in the world next to Greenland. And so we paddled a river system on the north side of the river, on the north side of the island for 700 miles, crossed the central mountain range, and then we descended another river system called the Fly River for 800 miles on the south side of the island. And our goal was to be the first to cross New Guinea without the use of motors. There had been several expeditions, earlier expeditions, that had tried and failed, and so that was our goal, and we found out why they had failed so many times.
Why did they
before.
fail? Did they get eaten by the crocodiles?
They failed mainly because of the central mountain range. The central mountain range of New Guinea is the rainiest place on Earth, and it's extremely thick foliage and extremely steep because you have all that water coming out all the time, and it makes just going down one side and up the other.
The central mountain range in New Guinea is the rainiest area on Earth?
Yes.
Then we have to have it make Aliyah to Israel so it can rain on us here, because that's what we live on. We don't have so many rivers. We have some rivers, the Jordan, the Yarkon. As my mother's friend said years ago, she was one of the founders of Kibbutz Kfar Blum near Kiryat Shmona, when she would bring guests to see the Jordan River. The Jordan looms so large in the Hebrew Tanakh and the Christian scriptures. She said, please don't hold your breath, because it's about the size of the Sawmill River where my parents live, Ardsley, Elmsford, a very little ambling brook, more or less, that runs north-south from New York City. It's called the Sawmill River because there was a sawmill there once. So the Jordan River, don't hold your breath. We need the rain. So you have the central mountain range, which in New Guinea, which is the most rainy area in the world.
Yes.
Yeah, we could use that here. And did you get caught in the rain a lot? Did it?
Oh yeah, it rained all the time. Yeah.
Did this?
But there's a canopy over you of jungle, so you can't even tell when it starts raining and when it stops, because even after it stops raining, the canopy, continues to drip on you for a long time. So it's hard to know exactly when it starts and when it stops.
So what did you do with your canoes when you weren't canoeing? Did you carry them?
Yes.
I mean, you can't fold them up and put them in your knapsacks. You carried them, you and your partner.
We had an inflatable kayak, which isn't a good idea around crocodiles, but anyways, that's what we had. So when we were done paddling up the river, we deflated it, rolled it up, tied it onto a backpack frame, and then we used the Nationals. We hired some of the Nationals, and they helped us carry our equipment over the mountains and to the other side, and then we inflated the kayak and floated down the other side.
What do you mean by Nationals? The local people?
The local people, yes.
We're going to get to the local people in a minute. I keep bringing up crocodiles because I've heard from Joel and his family that this is the only area in the world where the crocodiles eat people, not because they're hungry and don't have anything else to eat, and not by mistake, but in their genetic programming on the menu are people. So about 1,000 people recorded. That's the recorded number as being eaten by crocodiles each year. They're enormous. What was the largest crocodile? It was 30 feet?
It was over 30 feet, yeah, the largest one ever recorded having been killed there. But it's not unusual for them to reach over 20 feet.
Joel is going to tell us a little bit about the crocodiles and the role they play in the mythology and religion of the local people in the mountains. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the crocodiles are, as you say, are very dangerous, and so...
and big.
Yes, and so
even the little ones are big, over 20 feet.
Yeah, so the people have a great fear of them, and therefore it's within their belief system to believe that they're gods and so forth. And so they carve the front of their dugout canoes into the heads of crocodiles, and so when they see us paddling up in our inflatable kayak without the head of a crocodile, that seems pretty crazy to them. But like you said, they are man-eaters, meaning they purposely hunt people, and about the worst thing you can do is be caught out at nighttime in a crocodile-infested river system. This was the biggest problem for us on the south side of the island when we were paddling out what's called the Fly River, because that river has swamps that are so big you can't possibly paddle through them in a day. So you get caught out and the sun is going down and you can see the crocodiles swimming out in the river, and what are you going to do? There's no land to make a camp or get away from them, so there's no choice but to paddle through the night, and those were some of the most terrifying nights of my life, yes, definitely.
Are they more likely to attack at night than during the day?
Well, they're out hunting during the night, and you see them during the day over on the banks. There's, you know, sunbathing and whatnot, but yeah, at night they're out in the river itself hunting, and they're looking for, they hunt fish or people or the deer that swim across the river and this kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely, everybody told us, whatever you do, don't be caught out on the river at nighttime. You never see the nationals themselves, the natives, out paddling on the river at nighttime. It's too dangerous. But for us, we had to do it a few times because there was no shore. It was just swamp, endless swamp.
These crocodiles, do they come inland to attack people, or they mostly get people when they're going either on the water or going to wash at the riverbanks or whatever they're doing at the riverbanks?
Yeah, they'll lay near a village and wait for people to come down and wash, take a bath.
That's usually where the attacks take place.
That's usually where the attacks take place, or sometimes they attack their dugout canoe where they're
But they
paddling.
don't come inland. They don't
No.
come inland into the villages.
No.
Once a crocodile gets you in its jaws, is that it, or is it possible to rescue a person? Or are they too big and strong for that and too fast?
Yeah, once they got you, your chances of survival are not good, and they take you underwater. Oftentimes they'll twirl, and they'll
To stun and confuse the victim,
yeah,
and then you get drowned.
Yes, yeah, and then they'll eat you and store parts of you and all this kind of stuff that we probably don't want to go into. It's
So
gory.
this is a big part of the religion of the native peoples. When you came across the mountains and met local tribesmen who weren't expecting you, what kind of reactions did you get, and how did you talk to them?
Well, that's one of the problems with New Guinea too, is that there's literally over 1,000 languages in New Guinea. The different tribes speak different languages. So we had natives that helped us carry our kayak and our equipment. Then we came across another man whom we called the Bushy Man, who couldn't speak the language of the natives that we were helping us carry. And then all of us together came into another tribe deep in the interior that pulled their bows and arrows on us. And
Why did they do that?
because they were scared, they didn't know
They were
who we
scared
were.
of you.
And when we first approached the village, the women looked up, started screaming, grabbed their children, ran into the jungle, and then all the men came together in the center of the village, formed a defensive group with their bows and arrows, and then they approached us and pulled their bows and arrows back on us. And it was the men that were with us that knew what to do. They couldn't speak to these people. Nobody could speak to anybody, but they knew to lay on the ground in a submissive position and start, showing them that we were not there for any kind of violent reasons. So eventually, that night, this particular tribe danced around their fire all night, and then the people, and then the ones who were helping us carry, they left that night. They were afraid of these people. These people still practice cannibalism. It still happens in the interior of New Guinea. So they left in the middle of the night, and that left us alone with this particular group. And yeah.
I'm going to get to the cannibalism in a minute. Let's go back to the languages in the Tower of Babel situation you're describing. Over 1,000 languages in, relatively speaking, small space.
Yes.
How many people live in New Guinea, which are divided into 1,000 language groups? What's the total population?
I'm not
there?
sure what the population group is, but it's because each tribe is so hostile towards the other one that there hasn't been much, there hasn't been much working together, and therefore sharing a common language, and therefore the languages of the tribes remain very distinct from each other.
So you have a situation with an island, however these people got there, where the island is, you say it's the second biggest island in the world after
Greenland.
After Greenland, which would make it bigger than New Zealand.
Yes.
And yet in this isolated area where people, I think, have lived for thousands of years, you have tribes in their distinct tribal territories in mountain and jungle areas who fight with each other.
Yes.
And don't talk to each other and can't even speak with each other.
More or less, yes, very distinct from each other because of these endless revenge hostilities, that keep happening. So
I mean, once it gets started, you killed my uncle or my nephew, or
Exactly.
500 years ago it happened, and I'm going to settle it. So
Yeah.
the Hatfields and the McCoys, it goes on
exactly,
forever,
but a
like
lot of
the
things,
rest of the world.
Yes, like the rest of the world, yes.
So the old curse from the dispersion after the Tower of Babel, where in our tradition, Joel is Christian, I'm Jewish/Israelite, that the people were of one language, were building a tower, whatever it was. God came down, saw the tower, and scattered the people all over the world, gave them different languages and different cultures, and in many cases, maybe in most cases, a spirit of enmity and hostility exists between ethnic and religious groups all over the world till today. As most of us know from our own experience, wherever we come from, someone has somebody else we don't like.
Yes,
So
that's right.
hopefully the world will pull out of that into better days. So, we went over the crocodiles, we went over the languages, we went over the hostilities, now we come to cannibalism. The cannibalism that is practiced by some of these tribes, I presume in very remote, isolated places.
Yeah.
Is this cannibalism where there's a sacrificial victim chosen from within the tribe, or it's usually prisoners of war, let's say, from other tribes? When they engage in human sacrifice, who's getting sacrificed and cooked and eaten?
Well, first of all, of course, it's illegal in New Guinea to practice cannibalism. So it's just these remotest tribes in the deepest part of the interior that don't really even know that there's a government for New Guinea that continue their old way practices. There's two forms of cannibalism, or at least two forms. One is where they will eat somebody from their own tribe because they believe if somebody in their tribe has an outstanding trait, let's say they're a fast runner, then if the tribe will eat them, then that trait will spread throughout the tribe. There's that type of cannibalism, so it doesn't pay to show off in such
You don't
places.
want to be very exceptional as an athlete, for example, in such a culture, from what
Yes.
Joel is telling us.
And then the other one is about warfare and about taunting the enemy. It's not a sacrifice. It's you've killed one of the enemy and you eat them as a taunting, of the enemy.
To intimidate and threaten your enemy.
Yes.
The ancient Aztecs, Maya, I'm not sure which tribe in Central or South America, played lacrosse games. And at the old temples there, I saw some documentaries on this, there are carved reliefs of those games showing one of the players being sacrificed. And until recently, the archaeologists or anthropologists who studied this thought it was the captain of the losing team. Then they came to the conclusion, just like Joel says, it was exactly the opposite. No, you sacrifice the one who's stronger, the captain of the winning team, because he had these traits where you believe somehow magically if you sacrifice this person, it will make the gods happier, and or it will somehow be propitious for your tribe, that you'll somehow acquire that characteristic. When I was in high school and studied biology, it was considered law that you cannot acquire genetic traits can't be acquired from the environment. This was Ferdinand Laplace, I think that was his name, a French scientist, said that nurture can affect nature, that genetic traits can be modified through the environment. This was considered to be ridiculous when I went to school, except for one problem scientists have now determined, unless they determine that's not true, that our thoughts, feelings, words, actions, and environmental influences can affect our genes, that genes are constantly being switched on and off and relating with each other in different local area networks in a 24/7 system. It's very plastic, our genome. It turns out that Laplace was right. So the idea these people have that we will kill and cook the fastest runner or the biggest weightlifter or whatever, and we'll acquire the traits, is bizarre, but the idea that traits can be acquired from the environment actually is true. So they weren't so far off. So though, would they have killed you, or you weren't fast runners, or you weren't an enemy tribe? You weren't a candidate to be cooked for lunch or dinner or breakfast then? You were just threatening and frightening because they didn't know what you were.
Yes, and that's why the men who were with us up to that point left that night, and
because they were from other tribes which
were worried about getting eaten, and they left us there, and of course we were worried about it, but they didn't need us. That's
Do any of these tribes have peaceful traditions where they don't fight among themselves or with other tribes, or they're all warlike?
Not that I'm aware of.
It's not a very encouraging view of the past or the future, where I read more and more about student production. Students want to do films on zombie apocalypses. Where do they get these ideas? Well, if we look at what Churchill called the lamentable catalog of human crime from the beginning of recorded civilization, which starts with the Sumerians 5,000 years ago in southern Iraq, till today, one could get a negative, pessimistic view of the human condition and our future. Fortunately for Joel and me, our Bible says that we do have a bright future, and the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and there'll be an end of violence and fighting. We believe that will come to pass, and hopefully we'll all live to see it. What about the food? Aside from eating each other, what do people eat in New Guinea, and what do they offer you to eat? Do they have traditions of hospitality for guests, or strangers are not regarded well by these tribes?
Well, I mean, food was a major problem for us. We had our plan that we were going to cross the interior mountains in 14 days, so we brought 14 days worth of food and supplies, and then it ended up taking us 53 days to get across, so you can imagine that we ran out of food very early. So we ate what the people ate, and that included bats, lots of bats, all kinds of birds, bird eggs, all kinds of reptiles, and lots of insects, including beetles, and basically anything that we could catch. Snakes, we ate pythons, we ate possums, that had been eaten by pythons that were inside of the python. We ate anything we could get our hands on, and so one of the things that we ate a lot of was bats, because there's lots of bats in New Guinea, and there's a type of plant there that looks like a coconut, but it's got spikes sticking up, and they would tie these to vines, and then they would stand in the entrance of big caves right at evening when the bats would fly out, and they would swing them around, and the bats' wings would stick to these, and that's one of the mainstays of our diet during that time.
Were any of these tribes vegetarian?
No.
Did they teach you anything about their music or art? Did they tell stories? Of course, the language problem. Did you ever have a translator at any point where you could understand what they were saying?
No, I mean, we could communicate to a degree, not even so much through sign language, but more even acting things out. We had to explain to them things like, you know, that we were looking for a river on the other side of the mountains. And
All through pantomime.
Yeah, and it is amazing how much you can communicate when you can't speak any of their language and the other way around. Of course, sometimes you think that they understand something that they don't, and vice versa. But yeah, it was a very big problem with communication, and it wasn't really, we were always on the move. We were always trying to get to the next place. We were always trying to find the next meal. So it wasn't a kind of atmosphere that of observation and this kind of thing. It was survival.
Did you know that it would be like that when you started out, or you thought it would be a relatively easy, simple trek to be concluded in the time period you had allocated at the beginning?
No, I always joke, and it's true, that ignorance will get you into a lot of situations that God can only get you out of. And this was definitely one of those situations. We were very ignorant of what we were going to experience, and we learned as we went. But yeah, it was always a shock to the system, and it never went as we thought it would. And but, you know, in retrospect, if I was to think, well, how could we have prepared ourselves for that trip better? There really wasn't a way to prepare for that type of trip. And if it wasn't for the ignorance, we never would have gone.
So you don't regret that you went?
No, not at all. No, I'm very glad that I went.
So it's better when you start out on an adventure, Marco Polo's adventures on the Silk Road to China, to just go, not necessarily to know too much about what's coming, and hope for the best and hope that there is some divine providence watching over you. So you're glad
Yes,
you went.
absolutely,
And
yes.
you're glad you didn't know more than you knew about what was waiting for you.
Right,
Otherwise you
because-
wouldn't have went.
Exactly. So ignorance plays an important role in that, and probably that's why I did it when I was young, because we're more ignorant when we're young, aren't we? So.
Right, and as we get older, like we see our grandparents, they're afraid of all sorts of things. We think, what are they afraid of? Because they know too much about what can go wrong.
Yeah, now 20 years later, I would have never done that trip at this stage in my life, and so, yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude this first discussion about New Guinea?
I would just add that...
Any advice for our Lewis and Clark aspiring explorers out there? Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, Colonel Travers?
I would just say that the whole trip took 53 days to get across the Central Mountains, but as far as crossing the whole island, it took 102 days, and it was a valuable experience because of what we learned on the trip. Really, what my book is about the trip itself, but more than anything, it really is about my relationship with Aaron, which through the course of this trip, we ended up hating each other and telling each other face to face that we hated each other.
You still hate each other?
No, we love each other today, and that broke towards the end of this trip. That hate turned to love, and we've been the best of friends and comrades ever since. But it is about the pressure that trip put on us and on our relationship.
So intense situations, I've been in some myself recently in the last year or two, can lead to intense relationships, whether for good or for evil, for hate or for love. But the hate can turn to love. The love can also turn to hate. In the end, they're intense, and now you're very intensely friends.
Yes, that's right.
Let me have a look at your book for a second,
Sure.
Joel, so we hold this up. Okay, so you want to get beyond fear. You want to go on a journey of self-discovery and relationship building with friends who become enemies or enemies who become friends. You want to live intensely, or better or worse, at least July. So you can go to New Guinea, but go somewhere, get out the door, don't hide under the bed. And I want you to read Joel's book, Beyond Fear. And we are going to have the link to where you can buy it. that will accompany this interview. So Joel, thank you
Okay.
very much. It's
Thank
been
you all.
really fascinating.
Yeah.
And one place, if I do go to New Guinea, I think I'll stay in the Hilton and see it all on the internet. Thank you very much for listening and for watching.
Sure.